Welcome back. This is episode 2 in our project to create a dashboard for work orders. In the spirit of October in which this is being filmed, I would ask the question, do you know who was the best dancer at the Monster Ball? It was the Boogeyman. All right, on to our project. What we're going to do in this episode is we're going to create different pivot tables which will drive our dashboard. In order to do that, we'll just go ahead, click here. We will go to Insert, and we will just say Insert a pivot table. Yes, we want it to be in a new worksheet, and we want it to be of this table. We're going to call this tab Age Description. And we're going to add the work order ID to the rows, description to the rows, and the requester name to the rows. Now, I don't like the way that this looks. It doesn't look very good to me. I like it to look more like a data table, more like data itself. And so I'm going to go into display and I'm going to say classic pivot table. I'm going to go into design and say show in tabular form. And we're going to put here the sum of days aged in values. We're going to right click here and we're not going to subtotal on the work order ID. We're not going to subtotal on the description. Okay, so we've added the age description tab. Let's go back to our work order data and we want to go into Insert, Pivot Table, New Sheet. We're going to call this one Days Aged. And for this one, we're going to put location into our filters, work order ID into row, and days aged here. We want this to be the classic. Okay. And then in G3, we're going to add a note. Just adding some formatting here. Now normally you wouldn't add a note or anything over here to the side of a pivot table because you want to be able to allow your pivot table to expand or contract. And if you added more columns or more row values, more field values, then what can happen, or values down here, what can happen is it can limit your pivot table from expanding. So you wouldn't want to do that. But I know that in this case, all we want to look at is days aged. And so we don't want this structure to change. And so it's why it's okay to put this note here. Okay, so now we're going to go back here and we're going to create another one. Insert a pivot table. This sheet we're going to call status tab, or just status. I'm going to call this the tab status. And we're going to put in our column status, in our rows location, and our work order ID, but instead of a sum, so first we're going to come in here in options, we're going to go to display. And again, this is just my preference. If you would rather not show it like that, that is fine. Go to design, show in tabular format. And now we're going to come into the sum of work order ID. We're going to go to the pivot table analysis. We're going to go to field settings. We're going to change this to count. And we are now done with that. Well, except that we also want to put this here. Okay, now we want to come in here and insert another pivot table. We are going to name this one All Days Aged. Work order ID in rows. And sum of days aged. This one's going to be a little bit more. Spell check to make sure we didn't misspell anything. In this note, we've added this pivot table drives data on the stats tab. If you change the structure, you'll break that data. Use the pivot table in the analysis tab for free form analysis, and we'll create that one in a few minutes. And then we're going to go back to work order summary, and we're going to again insert another pivot table. We're going to call this one crafts. And in our column, we're going to put crafts. In our rows, we're going to put location. And in our values, we're going to put work order ID. We come up into options. I'm going to change the display to classic. I'm going to come here into the sum of work order ID. And I'm going to change this to count. And I'm going to say design, show in tabular form. And that's it for that one. We're going to come back over here to work order summary data. And we're going to insert another pivot table. This one we will call number requested completed. In our column, we're going to come down to request month. It's going to be in our column. In our rows, we're going to have location. And here we're going to have not the sum, but the count of the work order ID. Change this to classic. Here we're going to insert, we want these two in the same tab. And let's type in here number we'll make that a bold. We're going to come here. We're going to insert another pivot table. This will be TBL WO data. Same information except for in our column we're going to have the complete month description. Going to have the location here and the work order ID here. Make this the classic. And this will be count. And we're going to type in here number per completion month. I'm going to come back over here. We're going to insert one last and final pivot table. And this is going to be, we're just going to put work order ID and days aged. We're going to call this analysis. And this will just be for free-form analysis, whatever the user wants to come in and use, because we don't want them changing any of these. And now normally, instead of adding a note, what I would do is I would probably just hide these tabs so that they're not accidentally overwritten or something. But, people who are not used to using pivot tables probably wouldn't know that they need to be on a pivot table in order for this pivot table analysis option to show up in their menu. That then allows them to refresh all. So that whenever they're downloading new data and they're adding it to the data table, they can refresh their data tables. And so if you've hidden all of them, which we can do with this, and by having this analysis tab here, and we can give them an explanation, go to the analysis tab, click anywhere in a pivot table, and then refresh all. We could also add a button for using code that we push a button and it would refresh all of pivot tables. So we could do that too, but we're not going to get all of that involved in this project. Okay, and so that was it for this episode of just adding in our pivot tables. So thank you for joining me, and I hope that you will join me for the last session, which is the actual creation of the dashboard itself. Thank you and have a fantastic day.